It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Welcome to calendar year 2020, and I have every hope and expectation that this year will be better for you than the last year, and I hope that last year was fantastic, so this is just going to be better as we all continue to spin around the sun on this little rock called Earth. In this show, we've got a lot of fun things. We're going to talk to Robert Stanley about podcasts and podcasting and his show. And I also have an Investing Skeptically segment that apparently is in high demand. I have received a large number of emails and a few phone calls, people asking if I'm going to do a roundup for calendar year 2019. It's something that I've done each of the previous years. And at some points, I even did quarterly reviews, but it just ended up being too much. And the problem is that a lot of this information, while really cool, and you can get down to 1, 2, 3 decimal places in the details, it's not necessarily actionable. I mean, the very fact that your portfolio made a bunch of money doesn't mean you should change it. We'll talk more about that in upcoming segments, but in this episode, it's kind of going to be a factual layout of what the U.S. stock market did, what international markets did, what bonds did, and what kind of performance you should be expecting in your portfolio. So hopefully in the next few days, if you have not already seen them, you will get your statements from 12/31 of 2019. Do some quick numbers, figure out how much you made in 2019, and then listen to this segment or come back and listen to the segment again and see how you did. If you're within a few percentage points and you have the right investments, no concerns, no worries. If you're 100% in stock and you made 5 or 6%, you have a serious fucking problem and you better figure it out. Also, the other extreme can be crazy. If bonds made a certain percentage this year and you crushed that, that's fantastic that you did so well, but it also probably means you're taking on a whole lot of risk that you may not be aware of. So sometimes making more than what's expected in an investment category is a sign of a portfolio problem, because for me, the idea is not making necessarily the maximum money every year, but making the most money reasonably possible in the long run without taking great big risks. It's slow and steady. I like to tell people I am the tortoise in the tortoise and hare story. We get over the finish line eventually, but it's not fast. We're not going to make a ton of money in any given year, although this year may be an exception where almost everything went up and went up a lot. So more on that later in the segment. Another fun story that a listener sent me, I'm just going to cover this very briefly. It has to do with Great Britain, and there is a very famous stock picker there called Neil Woodford. And I'm not sure I fully understand the details, but he has been compared to Warren Buffett. And he has been picking stocks for 40, 50 years and doing amazing things for different funds, one fund and another fund, a long and well-regarded career. And finally decided a few years ago, 2015, 2016, I'm trying to scroll through this article and find the details here for you, started his own mutual fund company, investment company, and opened up a few funds. And at the very beginning, started kind of like he'd always done, picking good companies at fair prices, but then somehow, some way, went off the rails a little bit and tried to use some alternative investments to beat everybody else, and it didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. Matter of fact, one of his funds now is 33 cents on the dollar for what it was 4 years ago. And this is during a period of time where the market has gone up, up, up. His investments have gone down, 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 and all of the funds that he ran are now closed. His business closed, and they're trying to figure out not only what happened, but how to sell any remaining investments that these funds may have and trying to give back the investors some of their money. And we're going to, some of these people that are still stuck in there might get 10, 15 cents on the dollar when this is all done. Maybe better, but it's a rough world out there. And if you start investing in creative stuff, which kind of goes to my philosophy, if I don't fully understand exactly what I'm investing in, I don't invest in it. There's nothing wrong with really slow, boring mix of stocks and bonds and index funds and making a reasonable amount of return over time. The big secret there is to save more money, work more, live longer, I guess. And odds are if you save enough and do it for a long enough period of time, you can be wealthy. It works. I've done it. I've seen other people do it. I've had clients do it. But it takes discipline and not spending all of your money and not doing anything crazy. I also had an update from a client, and I'm not going to give you too much details, that actually has a private placement REIT, like some of the stuff I've talked about recently and even in the further past, where you can go to these websites and they talk about making 10, 12, 15% a year by putting in some money, and they're going to buy a building, or they're going to buy a city block, or they're going to buy an apartment complex, and here's all the money you could make. It might work out that way, but it might not. And unfortunately, the investment that they bought has a 5-year minimum. So if you want your money out in less than 5 years, you can't do it. It's not even an option. And I've seen some of these where it says 5 years minimum, and we reserve the right to extend it 2 to 3 to 5 years more if we need the cash on hand to continue to develop this building and rent it out, or whatever it is they're going to do eventually. And some of that makes sense, because you cannot buy a 100-unit apartment complex and fix it all up and spend all the money investing in that if the money could disappear in a few months. So they have to tie it up. That's cool. Let them do that. I'm not interested. I always want to be able to get to my money in just a couple of days. And I can do that with index funds, with investments at Vanguard, with a brokerage firm like TD Ameritrade. I can get my money within a few days if I so wanted to. I don't know why I would want to, but I like that. That makes me feel happy. So the purpose of money is to make you feel happy with your life, and knowing that I could get my money is nice. Now, my investments could lose money, and that's why you have a well-designed, broadly diversified portfolio so that you can cover short-term needs while experiencing a reasonable portion of your money making the most in long-term growth with stocks. Anyway, I diverged, but this client of mine got an unsolicited offer from an unknown third party saying that they will give her 25 cents on the dollar and buy up her shares and let her walk away with 25 cents of the dollar. So if she put in $50,000, they would give her $12,500 right now, and she could walk away. These are the potential kinds of losses that you can experience in a weird alternate investment world. And this was something that was supposed to make 8 to 10% per year. And the funny thing is, so far it has, but it was set up so that all of that money gets reinvested. So not only is she looking at getting only 25 cents on the dollar for what she started with, but all dividends have been put back into it. So right now we're going to see if we can contact some people and at least stop the money from going back in. And maybe at this point, just waiting out. Thankfully, she does not need the 25 cents on the dollar right now. And I'm assuming if someone is offering 25 cents on the dollar, that they know what they're doing, fingers crossed, and it's worth more than that. So you're taking a low offer to get out and walk away from the stress and anxiety, and somebody knows that this has problems, but they think that it's worth at least 25 cents on the dollar. Otherwise, they would not offer that to you. And so they've got to cover their costs and overhead. And if they're willing to pay you 25 cents, it's probably worth 30, 40, 50 cents on the dollar, but clearly you're not going to get back what you put into it. And that's a really harsh thing to hear about, that you've lost 30, 40, 50% of your money over 5 years while the stock market has done amazingly well with an investment you cannot control and you cannot easily, or if at all, get your money out of. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about 2019 performance, and we're going to talk about podcasting with Robert Stanley. So don't go anywhere.
He loves you and he needs money. He always needs money. He's all powerful, all perfect, all knowing, and all wise. Somehow just can't handle money. Religion takes in billions of dollars. They pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now, you talk about a good bullshit story. Holy shit.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
This Investing Skeptically segment is on performance results from 2019, calendar year 2019. In the past, I've had people who were interested and wanted to know, but this year I've had a lot of emails asking me when I'm going to do this segment, and I'm not quite sure why that is. They're so excited that they've made a lot of money, or if just more listeners to the show create more interest, or because they've heard it in the past, they now want it and know it's available, or that it will be available coming soon. So this is where we're going to talk about how a whole bunch of different types of investments did over 2019. I'm going to start with bonds. Now, bonds in general did phenomenally well. So well that I'm a little concerned. I mean, it's just the way it is. The total bond market index, and all of these numbers, by the way, are going to be pulled from a Vanguard index fund, which may not represent the actual true performance numbers of a given market or index. It could be off by a couple of hundred basis points, like 0.02 or 0.05 or something like that. But we're going to be in the ballpark, so just relax. But the total bond market return for calendar year 2019 was 8.71%. Now, the reason that is odd, at least in my head, is that the current yield on the total bond market index, again, Vanguard's total bond market index, is around 2.26%. So theoretically, in the long run, that fund should return about 2.26%. A lot of bonds are 2 and 3 and 4%. If you have bonds or a bond fund that's paying more than 5% yield, you should make sure that you understand how it's able to do that, because it's taking on a whole lot of risk. You might have made a lot of money in 2019, but will you in the future? That's something you're going to have to think about. But this fund that has a 2.26% yield made 8.71. So that's going to be the default reference point for the total bond market index. Really, really short-term, really, really safe government bonds at Vanguard was 4.86%. Again, the current yield is 1.76. So a fund where you would expect something around 2% returned almost 5%. Absolutely staggering. And the biggest driver for most of these funds is the decrease in interest rates as promoted by the Fed. I think in 2019 there was 3 different 1/4 point drops in the interest rate. And bonds go up when interest rates go down. I have been using mostly short-term government and corporate bonds. And because of that, a lot of my clients would make something around 5, maybe 6% on these short-term bond funds. Do not expect that to continue for forever. If at some point interest rates go up, these funds can lose several percentage points. It's not going to be crazy. It's not going to be 50% or anything like that. But a couple points loss over a year would not be surprising. When I go to something that's a longer term, the U.S. long-term government bond fund made 14.3%. Its yield is also 2.2, but it made 14.3 in a calendar year. The reason for that is that effect of interest rates is magnified when you buy longer term bonds. So in this case, it worked out great. Interest rates went down 0.75, give or take, depending on how you want to slice it, and the fund went up 14%. That's fantastic. But that year is over. What happens next year? What happens going forward? If at some point interest rates go up 1%, this fund might lose close to 20%. If it goes up 2% over 2 or 3 years, it might lose 30 or 40 or 50% of its value. Of course, you'll get some of that back in the 2% yield, but understand that if you have a bond portfolio that has made you a lot of money in 2019, I think it's important that you understand what you own. Other things, Ginnie Maes are up almost 6%. What do I have here? Emerging market bonds are up 13%, and junk bonds are up almost 16%. So following one of my kind of guidelines, if you are in the process of taking money out, whether you have an RMD or you're just taking money out because you're in retirement or close to retirement, the two positions that I would want to take money out from that I currently have recommended for most of my clients is the emerging market bonds and the high yield bonds. Simply because they're pretty risky and they made a lot of money. 13, 15, 16%. Made a lot of money. Yeah, and I'm not saying you have to sell all of it, but if you scoop off 3, 5, 10%, 20% from those funds, that's a nice place to take some money to kind of lock in your wins and reduce your holdings in that asset, because that is a riskier asset and we don't want to get too much of it just because it goes up for a year or two. My clients generally won't have any of the long-term bonds that I was talking about earlier making 14%, but if you do, think about trimming from there as well, if not completely eliminating it, but that's up to you. And as I've talked about many, many times, if half of your portfolio is in bonds, it doesn't mean that half of your portfolio is safe. Look at the bond funds that you have. If you made 8, 9, 10, 12, 15%, 20% on those bond funds, that's awesome. You dodged a bullet. But will you continue to dodge going forward? Because you took a lot of risk. There's no way to make 20% in a bond fund and not have a whole lot of risk associated with that. So pay attention to that. U.S. domestic stock market. We're going to start with the total stock market, which is meant to be a representative of everything in the United States for the 12 months ending December 31st of 2019. That index is up 30.8%. That's right. In stocks, as a baseline measure for the U.S., you made almost 31%. Now, if we pull out the S&P 500, which is the number you're going to hear the most often, and I've already seen it, they're reporting that it made 28.9%, but the accurate number is 31.46. Think of it as 31.5. So the question is, how do you go from 29 to 31.5? Dividends. And this is something that's very tricky when you go on to a website or use some kind of tool to figure out how much a stock or a bond or a mutual fund has changed. And you put in January 1st and December 31st, and you look at the change in the price, you can do the math. Of course, the website might show you the number. It is going to be 28.9% for the S&P 500, because that is measuring how much the price of that investment changed in the amount of time that you selected. It does not reinvest the dividends. It doesn't tell you on the side, maybe it would, but how much you made in dividends. So you have to understand what you're looking at. Do those numbers include reinvestment of dividends? And when you go look at a mutual fund on the site, whether it's Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard is what I used, it'll show you the total return, which includes price appreciation plus the dividends. So the S&P 500 is up approximately 31.46. This number might change a few. I don't think it'll change 0.1%, but a couple hundredths of a percent in the next few days as they double check and triple check the numbers and wait for dividends maybe. But it's going to be around 31.5. And that's a lot. Fantastic. Man, if you had a good chunk or all of your money in the U.S. stock market, you really made it big in 2019. I think, and I'm doing this from memory, last year was a loss of 4.5%, including dividends, because without dividends, it was like -6. So 2 years in a row, you have -4 plus 31. The average is, 13, 14% per year for 2 years. Not crazy, but something to keep in mind. But if we look back 3 years at the S&P 500, the average return per year for the last 3 years is 12.2. Per year for the last 5 years is 11.6. And per year for the last 10 years is around 13.5. Now, when the long-term normal is give or take 10, 10.2, 10.4, and you can see that number on the S&P 500 Wikipedia page, which is a really nice page to look at. Keep in mind the 10-year number is fantastic, but the 15-year number is not. And it's always this thing, and I've had many discussions about this. What is the right number to use? 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 11 or 12 years, 15 years? I don't know. So if you look at it from just 1 year, 31.5% is crazy. If you look at it 10 years, 13.5 is a little above average. But if you look at it 15 years, it's below average because of calendar year 2008 is then included. So, it's over the last 10 years done better than average. Maybe that's because the fall in 2008 was an overreaction to the negative side. And so you're kind of compelled to do better than average going forward. Maybe it's not. That's something you have to decide. Within the United States stock market, I break it down into 6 segments. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but they're large cap growth and value, mid cap growth and value, small cap growth and value. One of the reasons I do that is because you can make modest adjustments. I'm talking a few percent. And somewhere in the next couple of weeks, I will talk about how my model allocation has changed. It really did change back around October 1st, but I wanted to make sure I was able to talk to all of my clients and implement that where possible. Because if you have a taxable account and all your money's in a taxable account, it may be very expensive. You might create a big tax bill to make adjustments if you're not careful. But for the 1 year numbers, the biggest difference is that large cap growth made 27 and large cap value made 26. I'm sorry, did I say 27? 37 and 26. 37 and 26. Large cap growth, 37. Large cap value, about 26. That's a 10-point spread. And that's fantastic. I mean, if you had stock funds that were all in large cap growth, you making 30, 35, even 40% would not be an unreasonable comparison. And you did fantastic. And it's something that's a big part of the mix that I use, but it also now is a sign to start reducing that mix. And again, like I said, that'll be a future episode. Mid cap growth and value are roughly 34 and 28, and small cap growth and value are 33 and 23. So all 3 growth positions made 33 to 37%, and the value positions made 26, 27, 28%. So that's another sign to me to shift towards value and away from growth. 1 year fluctuation doesn't affect me that too much, but this has continued to happen over the 3 and 5 and even the 10-year cycle. So something to ponder about. Vanguard REIT Fund, Real Estate Investment Trust, up 29%. We've had recent shows, and I'll have more shows, I'm sure, about private placement REITs where people are going to come to you and try to talk to you about investing in real estate. My first rule of thumb, one of my rule of thumb, I guess, is I don't invest in anything I do not fully and completely understand. And I don't fully and completely understand them, private placement REITs, and often when I look at them, there are red flags. Why deal with that shit when you could have made 29% with a pretty safe, pretty well-known real estate investment trust at Vanguard? 29%. Now, it won't make that every year, just like stocks won't make that every year. And again, over 10 years, this has averaged almost 12, where the total market has averaged around 13 plus. So real estate makes about, through REITs, about what stocks do. And sometimes it goes up or down different than what the general stock market does. This year, it's almost matched the performance. So that's what we have. International, I can break that down into the total international, developed, small cap, emerging markets, but I'm going to cut to the chase, and all of it together made about 21.5. So when you're looking at the U.S. making 31, international made 21. Now, that's way better than some of the past years for international, and you can see that in the 10-year numbers, which is about 4.5% per year for the last 10 years. But 2019 and I think 2017, international has done quite well. Not necessarily this year as well as the U.S. stock market, but nicely. Will that change in the future? I don't know. But it's something to ponder, that you should have exposure to international investing in your portfolio. If you are particularly worried that Trump and or Republicans are going to fuck up the U.S. stock market or the economy, which will eventually have a negative effect on the stock market, maybe have a little more international than you might otherwise. Of course, if you think Trump and the Republicans are going to destroy everything, well, I don't know what to tell you. Because then if you're right, there's no safe space. And it doesn't really matter what you invest in. So we have to assume that they're not going to light the entire world on fire. Fingers crossed. So that's a lot of detail. Now, one of the next things that I know people are going to do, and they love having these numbers, and that's fantastic, is they want to compare it to their year-end performance. And I know I will get a couple of responses. One response that I will likely get is someone comes to me and says, Phil, you talked about 31%, but I didn't make that. I didn't make 31%. So I'm going to give you a couple of breakdowns, and I just did some real quick calculations here. If you had 75% U.S. market and about 25% international, I'm going to leave the REITs out for this calculation to make it oversimplified. And it was 29 versus 31, so it's in the same ballpark. But if you had 75% in the U.S. and 25% in international, and you had 100% stocks, you might have made about 28.5% this year. But that's just something to think about, something to look at. Get your 1231 statement. If it doesn't have a percentage on it, which is cool, a lot of them don't, and I don't actually generally like it there, but if you want to do this comparison, hopefully your year-end statement has what you had in your portfolio a year before, keeping in mind that you may have added or removed money. If you have done that, well, if you're adding money, great. I want you to be doing that. If you're in retirement and removing money, that's cool because that's what the money's for. Keep in mind that can make the precise calculations phenomenally tricky. We're just going to ballpark it here. If you added some money and it looks like instead of 28%, you made 29 or 30 or 31, great. If you took out some money and instead of it looking like you made 28, you made 26, you can back that reduction out and do another calculation. We want to get into the ballpark. So in that scenario, again, 75% US, 25% international, you might have made about 28.5. If you are a 100% stock investor, you're not close to retirement, you're in your early 50s, your 40s, 30s, 20s, whatever, and you look at your statement and you're all in stocks and you made 8%, you have a serious fucking problem. How did that happen? You better dig into it and figure it out. How did you make 8% when the U.S. made 31, internationals made 21, and the blended rate might be 28, 28.5? How did you make 8? Is that because you're doing some stock picking? Did you forget to include the fact that you took out a bunch of money? And maybe that's the solution. Do you have a bunch of index funds that are all investing in stocks and they just suck really bad and you didn't know it before now? Dig into that. But a few points one way or the other, we're not going to worry about that. The idea is to have a long-term strategic plan, we don't want to focus on being off by 1%, maybe 2%. But if you're off by 10%, you should know why. Now, a lot of people are going to have some money in bonds. And I'm going to assume that 100% of your bond money is in the Vanguard Total Bond Index, which is a grotesque oversimplification, but it's the middle of the road because I don't know if you have all conservative bonds or all risky bonds. If you want a little bit more in-depth analysis, you can always contact me. We can talk, we can exchange emails, and then maybe you send me your year-end statement, and I'll see if I can find some time to look at it. My email, of course, is phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. So 100% stock, 75% U.S., 25% international, around 28.5% return. But if you had, 10% in bonds. Oh, see, I thought I had this already. Hang on a second. If you put 10% in bonds, then your return might be 26.5%. Still very nice. If you had 20% in bonds, your return might be 24.5%. If you have 30% in bonds, 22.5%. Let's continue this game a couple more times. 40% in bonds, 20.6%. And half of your money in bonds, you might have a return of 18.6%. So if you had half your money in bonds, then the other half split 75-25 domestic and international stocks, it's still an amazingly good year because the long-term norm for something like that should be closer to 7% per year. You made 18.6%. So almost everybody has done really, really well. Again, if you look at your year-end performance and you're 10, 12%, 5%, why? How did that happen? Take a look at it. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to go over. That's a lot of numbers. Hopefully you weren't driving or jogging or doing something with machinery during that. If you want more detailed information, you can contact me and we can talk about it and find out what you need. But that's some information about 2019 year-long results, only the calendar year of 2019 from the beginning to the end. Oh, and I almost forgot. The one thing I did want to mention is how quickly this information can change. So I'm going to pull up the results from 3 months ago and just compare it to the U.S. stock market because I know that this number was particularly interesting. The total stock market return for the preceding 12 months ending on September 30th was 2.88%. So if you looked at these same numbers 3 months ago, the total stock market was 2.88 and now it's 30.8. Well, that's almost 28% difference. The market did not go up 28% in the last 3 months. What happened is the market went up considerably in the last 3 months, and you also dropped off the really big drop from the fourth quarter of 2019. So when someone calls me and says, Phil, I'm looking at this statement and I only made 3% and you said I should make close to 30, what is the exact dates that you're looking at? It's very important. You have to compare, apples to apples, not an apple to an orange. Anyway, some information about stock market returns for 2019. Hopefully that helps you take a look at your portfolio and see if you're doing all right. By now, you've probably figured out that 2019 large cap growth stocks beat just about anything and everything that is available as far as a measure. It crushed it. And this is on a series of years where large cap growth stocks have beaten everything else. And a lot of that's driven by the names that you know: Netflix, Amazon, Google, Facebook. Names that seem like today they can never do any wrong. And no matter how much money they've made, you want to put more money in there. But be advised, things change. I don't know how these stocks are going to do in the future. I don't know if they're going to go up or down. But history is a cruel teacher. And things that have been the biggest and the bestest in the past are often not the biggest and the bestest today. And I'm going to give you an example. I looked at the largest companies by market capitalization on July 1st of 2007, before the world changed, before the real estate crisis, before the capital crunch crisis, and before the dawn, or I guess not before the dawn, but before the reigning kings that we have now were anywhere near as big as they are, with one exception. But the top largest companies by market cap, and I think this is the entire world, by the way, ExxonMobil, GE, Total Gas and Oil Company, Microsoft, Royal Dutch Shell, PetroChina, AT&T, Citigroup, BP, British Petroleum, and Bank of America. Combined, these companies had a combined market capitalization, yeah, I know I repeated myself there, sorry, of about $3 trillion. Absolutely amazing companies that, for the most part, could make money every year, year in, year out, had done incredibly well because that's how they got to those positions of being the largest companies in the world. But things change. If you look at those 10 companies, the 10 biggest companies that were worth $3 trillion 12 and a half years ago, today they're worth about $3 trillion. Wait, yeah, they're worth about the same fucking thing. So after 12 years, on average, they're worth the same amount as they were 12 years ago. ExxonMobil is down 40%. GE, 75%. Total down 60%. The one shining light, and this is very common when I look at a basket of 10 or 20 stocks, usually there's just one or two that have done well. Microsoft is that winner. I guess you're probably not surprised because you know about the world in 2019. It's up 327%. Royal Dutch Shell is down 13%. PetroChina is down 46%. AT&T is actually up 13%. So that's nice. Citigroup is down 30%. British Petroleum down 45%. Bank of America is actually up 47%. But on average, they went from 3 trillion to 3 trillion and 18 billion. Chump change. Basically, the net result is about the same. And I'm going to compare that to the Vanguard Total Stock Market institutional or Admiral shares. That's what I'm looking for, Admiral shares. And that is up 127%. The price point was $35.13 in July 2007, and it's now $79.88 per share. Now, all of these numbers are without dividends. So please be advised. We've talked about this, and we're going to talk about it some more. You must know whether you are including dividends or not including dividends. So in the top 10 companies, I looked at market capitalization July 1st of 07 versus market capitalization just around the very end of 2019, the beginning of 2020. And I did the same dates for the Vanguard Total Stock Market, and I have not included the dividends. I was just making a point because there could be some complications that some of these companies might have bought something or sold something or split or whatever. So this is always a dicey thing to do, but unless I'm making a really big miss, and that's always possible, these 10 biggest companies 12 and a half years ago are still worth on as a total group about what they were 12 and a half years ago, where the total U.S. market is up 127%. And this is one of the reasons why when people make big wins in a handful of stocks, that I recommend that they diversify. You don't have to completely get out of that stock. I mean, if you still love Tesla, if you still love Apple, if you still love Netflix, fine, hold some. But make sure it's less than 5% because you don't want to spend the next 12 years treading water while everyone around you makes a lot of money. So just something to think about, the concerns and the risks of using your backward-looking lens to predict the future. Just because something has won for you for the last 3, 5, or 10 years does not mean that it will win in the future. And based on this, odds are it's not gonna. And that's a long, frequently repeating pattern throughout the history of stock prices. Companies do well for years, sometimes decades, and then they don't. So shit changes. That's a little bit on that, I guess.
The longer you live, the more you look around, the more you realize something is fucked up. Something is wrong here. War, disease, death, destruction, hunger, filth, poverty, torture, crime, corruption, and the ice-capades. Something is definitely wrong. This is not good work. If this is the best God can do, I am not impressed. Results like these do not belong on the resume of a supreme being. This is the kind of shit you'd expect from an office temp with a bad attitude. And just between you and me, in any decently run universe, this guy would have been out on his all-powerful ass a long time ago. And by the way, I say this guy because I firmly believe, looking at these results, that if there is a God, it has to be a man. No woman could or would ever fuck things up like this. So...
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship. All right, everybody, welcome back from our little break there. Next up, we have Robert Stanley. How are you, sir?
Fantastic, man. Happy to be on the Big Phil Show.
Well, I'm delighted you're on, and you have, among other activities, a podcast called The Right to Reason. Did I do that right?
You did. It's The Right to Reason at therighttoreason.com on YouTube and Patreon and all your little podcast outlets, as it were.
Yeah, and all major toy stores. You have been doing this for how long now?
Coming up on 3 years, so I'm still new, still green.
Yeah. You're new. That's cute. And it's funny, I was checking back, and it appears to be about 2.5 years ago. It was the last time you were on the show. It must have been pretty early on then.
Yeah. You were a major reason that the show, even, I'm not just trying to kiss your ass here, Phil.
Kiss
I'm being
away.
honest with you, man.
Kiss away.
A major, you're like, oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
But no, you were a major reason for my initial success. It really was. I was just throwing random shit at the YouTube wall back then and hoping something would stick. And then after I went on your show, a 60% increase. And I did the math. And I know you're not a math guy. You're not a numbers guy, Phil.
Never heard of numbers.
But that's significant if you're not aware. But
well,
yeah, it really helped out, and I really appreciate it. And then you came on the show, and you gave me some financial advice.
Uh-oh.
I remember.
Oh shit! I'm in trouble. Did you follow my advice? That's probably the worst thing I can ever hear.
I tried, but but you didn't just give me advice there. I remember I used to message you all the time and ask you, how do I debate this guy? And you would warn me significantly about or it was Kent Hovind was one I remember you said, this guy's going to try to gish gallop you. Don't let him do it.
Yeah.
He did. He still did. But at least I knew it was coming, so I didn't get overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a really successful, slimy debate tactic because I think a lot of people, and this is probably one of the pieces of advice I've given you and maybe many other people, if anyone asks, and now anyone who's listening, whether you want to know it or not, the debate is not between you and the other person on the stage. The debate is a performance and possibly your chance to entertain and educate the audience. Fuck the other person. That you're not going to convince them, especially in the world of religion. You're not going to convince a devout religious person who makes their living going out and promoting the Bible. You're not going to change their mind on a debate stage. But if there's a couple hundred people or a couple thousand people in that audience, or if you're online and even more watch it, that's who you want to talk to. So everything you do has to be about bringing them in, getting them to think, getting them to question, and getting them to consider a perspective other than the one that they may be coming in with. And the person on the stage is only a foil, is only part of your strategy. So you have to treat them that way as how do you utilize them to achieve your goals? Because I've seen people just go in and go, I'm having a formal debate and there's rules and there's points. No one cares. No one cares about that stuff.
It's Oxford.
Yeah.
And it's professional. And I've got a 7-point thesis with bullets. But you're right. It's not the guy across from you. It's the turtle on the fence post.
Yeah.
Is the way I always think about it. And it's not just because they're on the fence post and that sense of, the analogy that could go either way. But the turtle didn't put himself there. And he certainly doesn't want to be there. And if you can help that person out, that's the one that's going to make the difference.
Well, I've from time to time, I don't want it to be too big of a part of my show, but it is an important part for me. I have on people that have deconverted. And it's very common in today's age that YouTube videos and debates is a big part of that, because they start having questions. They have discussions with their friends and they say, I'm going to go really learn this stuff so I can defend the faith. And when they hear the arguments being put up, all of a sudden the arguments for Christianity aren't really that good. And then one of the phrases, I'd like to think that I came up with it, is that with apologetics, which my son thinks is a hysterical use of the word apology, but it's not really related to that. But apologetics, the arguments don't have to be good. They only have to be good enough. And if you're deep and you're in it and you're a believer, they're good enough. But when you start to have questions and you hear those arguments, they're not good enough anymore because they're not good. And that's every time there's a debate. If that is something you can do to create an audience that listens to you, you're doing God's work, man. I guess that's what I want to say.
Yeah. Well, I need help again, Phil. I'm in trouble.
Yeah, what's going on?
But no, really, I'm actually worried. So you've helped me out with finance. You've helped me out with random debate moments, and I bought my house in 2008.
Yeah.
Right at the financial collapse, the housing crisis.
Now, did you buy before or after the collapse?
Right in the middle. I mean, technically It started in 2007, I guess. But in 2008 is when I bought it. April of 2008. It's older than I am. The air conditioner keeps going out over and over and over. I keep having the same repair guy come back. I tried different companies or whatever. But eventually it comes to the point where the guy says, I can keep taking your money, but you just need to throw $5,000 at this thing and get a new one. And I'm not actually talking about air conditioners. I'm talking about my fear of the economy, what's about to happen. The 2008 collapse hit me hard, just as a personal thing, to me to you. Don't tell the listeners.
Yeah.
But it lack of better words, man, it fucked me up financially, and I kind of feel like the American economy, maybe, I don't want to make it as broad as capitalism itself, but just finance in general, it's a lot like that AC unit where we keep trying to fix it again and again and again. And perfect example, this is just something simple off a recent Google search that I was doing, because I was asking myself, how often is this thing going sideways? What's the predictability of the next time we have another collapse? Obviously, Great Depression was in 1929 to 1933. There was another recession in 37, 45, 49, 53, 58, 60, 69, 73, and 80. Right around there was that oil problem, the gas problem. Another one in 81, just a year later. Another one in early 90s. And I know a lot of the listeners are going to, what are you talking about? 90s was awesome. But early 90s, they had another recession. It lasted 8 months in the early years of 1990. That didn't come back until 2000. And then the Great Recession, 2008. It's just, it keeps failing. And Phil, I feel like this is my air conditioner.
Yeah.
And
well,
I'm wondering, do we replace the system? And if we can't replace the system, when's the next time, it's a summer day and my AC goes out?
Yeah. So depending on how far you want to take the analogy, as far as investing goes, just keep adding money. Always keep adding money until you're taking money out, in retirement. But when there's a recession and the stock market goes down, which is not always correlated, but it often is, you're buying on sale. So every single time in the past, the market's come back. Every single time in the past, the economy has come back. But what you have to do is find a way to protect yourself in the short run, which is one of those things people, come to me and they go, I finally have $3,000. My entire portfolio, my entire net worth is $3,000. I want to start investing. And I might say, you need a couple of months of cash on hand, just in case, because if 2008 hits and you lose your job and your company goes broke, you have to have something to protect you in the short run. So you have to have this life balance. It's funny you mentioned the air conditioners because last year our blower motor in our furnace went out. And it was the same kind of thing where they're like, well, this blower motor is old enough that we could get the parts, but it's going to cost this, and we have to take it apart and take it out and put it back in. And for only a little bit more, we could put a whole new modern system in there. But you need to change the control unit, the thing on the wall, the thermostat, the electronics. And since we're replacing all of that, you might as well go ahead and replace the burners and put in a more efficient burn unit, so you can go from 85% efficient to 96.2 or something. And while we're at it, your air conditioner's 20 years old.
It just keeps happening. It's it's like dominoes.
Now,
those wall units aren't cheap. The thermostat.
No,
I mean, if you go with a modern one,
yeah,
those things will run you 15 easy. Well, because they level out throughout the day, which it saves you money in the long run.
Yeah. Well, I have the luxury, no doubt about it, that I could just snap my fingers and say, yeah, put in a new furnace and a new air conditioner. But I've also had the experience where the previous house that we had, we basically fixed nothing for 5 years. And then when we wanted to sell the house, we spent $15,000 over 3 or 4 months improving everything just to sell it to somebody else. Now, the nice thing was the house sold in a week, which our house before that took us 8 months to sell. So I was really happy to sell a house in a week. But I said to myself, next time around, I'm not going to wait till I'm selling it to get all the benefits from all the money that I'm spending. So, we did some math on what we might save from the air conditioning and the furnace being new. And I decided it was an investment. So we did that upgrade. But not everybody can drop that kind of money, right then to fix something. So you've always got to take that personal financial flow into effect, because if you're barely getting by and you live far enough north, maybe you can survive a couple of weeks or a couple of months without AC. Changes the calculus a little bit.
Does it piss you off though? Honestly, I know that's not really what we're talking about, but I'm just curious. I love picking your brain, man.
It's all
good. Does it piss you off what happened with that recession in 2008? When your money and my money paid for those banks to get away with that crime, right? And then they got these golden parachutes. They got all these bonuses. Yeah. The ones that didn't leave, and that way they left and became lobbyists, Phil.
Well,
many of them just started, and a lobbyist, I understand the importance of it, but part of that agenda is to manipulate the political system, and that's fucking with my democracy, man.
Yeah, it is. And I'll break it up into a couple of different parts. First of all, we should have regulations and rules in place so that we never end up getting to what happened in 2008. We didn't have the rules then. We don't have those rules now. So that's the first problem.
We didn't make any changes. We just paid the bill and pretended like it's like me paying for my AC unit to get and pretending it's not going to fail again. And I'm wondering what's around the next corner.
And an unusually pessimistic note here for me is I think in some ways it's worse. But so you have the system that's not generally systematically good enough, and then it glitches. Now, fixing the glitch at the moment, I think, was absolutely necessary. It was the obligation of the government to step in and fix things so that their entire financial system doesn't completely and totally collapse. I applaud that 100%. I know there were people that said, let them all fail. Well, if 10 or 20 or 30% of the banks fail, I don't think you want to live in that environment economically. So that had to be done. So there was a problem in the process before that wasn't adjusted correctly. That's a mistake. The bailout itself, not a mistake. However, the methodology of the bailout itself, I think, was horribly mismanaged, because if I have to spend several hundred million or several billion on a bank to bail it out, the people at the top are getting thrown in the street. I'm sorry. You fucked up. You guys broke all this shit. You're out. And you should have thrown them all out. They shouldn't have been able to make money and profit and benefit from the government fixing it. And what needs to happen is we need to go back to what was created in the 30s. Maybe we need to tweak it or revise it or something. But when you go to a bank, it should be boring as hell. You get very little dividend. It provides some services, but it's safe, it's secure, and that's all a bank does. Bank stuff that you think of as an average person. When banks start taking your money and doing buyouts and credit swaps and really elaborate, confusing, tricky, and risky shit, that creates a problem. And that has been illegal for a long period of time. And those regulations have fallen one after another while Democrats are in charge and while Republicans are in charge. And all that stuff needs to come back. That way, if people want to start up a company where they do leverage buyouts or they do complicated investment stuff, if with their private investors, if that whole process goes kaplooey, fuck them all. Right? The company that they all put their money in, it all goes to zero and the whole thing falls apart, but it doesn't affect our banking system. Those things need to be separated back out. And that's one of the things that we could do. The other one is that some of our larger banks, and I'm looking at Citibank and Wells Fargo, just too fucking big. I'm sorry. I don't think a bank should have more than 5% of the assets of all Americans in their bank. Anything that's bigger than that should be split apart. How one splits it apart, I'm not sure. We split apart AT&T. I mean, that was the one and only landline telephone company. Got busted up in, I think, 10 or 12, 13 different pieces. It can be done. And that way, when the banks are too big to fail, the problem was that they were too big. Not that they failed. But so there's two parts to it. They should never be that big. And they should be so boring and lame that they really would have to do something extra special to fail, which people still find a way to do. But allowing them to do really risky things with money that's meant to be guaranteed, it shouldn't be that way. And that's some of the ways that you go to fix it. The other thing that I'm concerned about today, not necessarily today, but pending at some point in time, the continued concentration of wealth into the hands of the few will disable our economy. As I don't remember which guy said it, but one of the billionaires that is part of this Billionaires for America said, He said, as a billionaire, I can only buy so many blue jeans. And once he's got 10 or 20 or 30 or 50, one for every week of the year, how many more blue jeans does he buy? None more blue jeans. Whereas if $1 billion goes out to 10,000 people, and those 10,000 people get their prorated share of $1 billion, they can all go out and buy blue jeans. And if it's only one or two pair, that's way more blue jeans being sold. And so if we get to the point where the 80, 90, 95% of Americans can't afford to really buy much of anything, who are the billionaires gonna fucking sell to?
Right.
I don't know that we're there yet, but that's something in the long run is a problem. And if we really wanted to juice our economy up, you put on, as crazy as it is, a personal wealth tax that Elizabeth Warren has suggested, or we just go back 20, 30 years ago where people that made a lot of money weren't paying 32%, but 39.6, 45, 60. I think even AOC threw out 70 or 90%. I don't know if we want to go that high. I don't know that we need to go that high.
Yeah.
But people who have billions of dollars, if instead of having $2 billion, you have $1.8 billion, you're not going to notice it. But someone who has $20,000 of income, if they go to $18,000, they are going to notice it. It's life and death for that person. And I've had people say, well, Phil, basically what you're talking about is a redistribution of wealth. Yeah, that's exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm going to own it. Or I'll have someone say, well, Phil, it might mean you pay higher taxes. Yeah, I'm okay. And then, of course, they'll throw out, well, if you want to go ahead and pay more taxes, voluntarily pay more taxes. No, dumbass. That doesn't fix anything. It has to be a systematic thing. So anyway, long-winded answer to some of the things that you're concerned about. But as far as our current economy, it looks healthy. I think people often overreact to things in the news. As an example, the tariff wars. The tariff wars are definitely creating negative pressure on the economy. How much negative pressure? I don't know. I don't think it's that huge yet. But there are some sectors like farmers who actually in bulk voted for Trump are having some serious fucking problems. Because
is it going to work out in the end? Like, is Trump, could this dumb-witted orange buffoon actually be making some good calls here?
Well, he's not figured any of this out. He's just buying into conservative philosophies and some philosophies that have been presented and are accepted by, in general, from Republicans. And there is some logic from a system-wide thing, from a long-term thing, that if the United States fights harder against China, that eventually we don't have as many jobs go away. We have more stuff built here. But the process to get there should not be dictated by a random tweet or an executive order because it's a national emergency. It needs to be a well-thought-out plan of how we get there. So sure, maybe in 20 years, a process like this net could be an actual win for the United States. But in the short term, it could be absolutely crippling to the economy. Another thing that we have currently as far as the economy and maybe more specifically the stock market, cutting corporate tax rates creates a positive pressure on stock market valuations, which for a lot of people, not enough people, but for a lot of people, when their portfolios go up, they feel better. When the market goes up, people feel better. Even if they don't have any investments, they feel better to see the market goes up. So in the short run, when companies have more cash on hand because they're paying less taxes, combined with the fact that they're not making any investments because they don't see any desire or drive to create or produce more products because they're not going to be able to sell them, why not just buy back shares of your stock or distribute the cash to your owners? And so stocks become more valuable because they pay dividends, or the stocks go up because there's fewer people owning the same number of shares because the company itself buys the shares. So in the short run, that can have a materially positive effect on the market. Well, how big is that? I don't know. I think it's notable. And at some point when all the companies stop buying their shares of stock back, does that mean that once that positive pressure is gone, that stocks go down? Maybe. But one of the things I tell people is, in the last 100 years, we've had World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Iraq War, George W. Bush. All these things were horrible, and yet the average return for the stock market is 10. Is what we're going through now from an economic perspective any different? I'm not convinced that it is. So just keep plodding along and hoping and assuming that you're going to keep making something close to 10% as we go forward. So from an investment perspective, but probably a more pressing concern for me is the courts and kids being put in cages and us turning our back on allies like the Kurds and just generally fucking average people that are struggling to get through their days.
Yeah. And here's the thing. When you talk about Trump, I've heard it argued from people that are way more intelligent in terms of economics than I am, that this tariff stuff is going to pay off. And not necessarily just like Reaganomic, trickle-down economic BS of giving more money to or cutting off taxes from the rich or whatever. But this tariff game, Trump's got it locked here. And I don't really know. But when I think of Trump, I don't think of 2016 when we were all distracted by him, telling Hillary, you be in jail and all that BS. I'm thinking Wells Fargo. You brought that up earlier. 2016, they ripped off. If I told your listeners, they ripped off hundreds of thousands of their customers, signed them up for checking accounts and savings accounts, and they all got all sorts of unexpected credit fees and sign-up fees. They were able to use those accounts to justify other expenditures that they had and getting more investments because, hey, look, all these people are joining our team. Kind of like Elon Musk with his shitty-looking truck, He's telling everybody, hey, just send me like $100. Why? Because if you get a whole bunch of people signing up, then you could get a whole bunch of loans. And that's what Wells Fargo did. And I look at that and say, if I told these listeners hundreds of thousands of clients, they'd freak out. But it was in the tens of millions, Phil.
Yeah.
Wells Fargo ripped off tens of millions of people. And this is terrifying to me, man. Like, I don't understand a lot of this financial stuff like you do, right? And that's why whenever somebody from the other side of the political divide comes and says that Trump's tariff game is going to pay off in the end, I don't have a very
I think
rebuttal available.
There's a chance that that's true depending on your definition of the end. If you mean 20 years from now, after 18 years of pain and suffering, there might be merit to that, but that doesn't mean that's the right path to get there.
Right. Well, I will tell you, while I do enjoy making the Right to Reason podcast, my day job is actually in research and development of pharmaceuticals.
Aha. Another area of I know some things.
Okay, fair enough. So this is what really bothers me. To kind of do full circle here, we were talking about lobbyists. We were talking about how they affect the agenda of the public, right? How they have an impact on our democracy,
right?
Okay. If you look at the top 10 lobbyists that are affecting America right now, okay, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 56 million. And just before I read the other 9, let's remember Chamber of Commerce is a amalgam of many businesses. Some of the other 9 I'm about to mention. So that's not even like...
Yeah. Did you say 56 million?
Yes.
That doesn't sound big enough.
Per year.
Okay, go ahead.
National Association of Realtors, 30. Open Society Policy Center, 24. Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, 22. American Hospital Association, 18. Blue Cross Blue Shield, 17. American Medical Association, 16. Amazon, Facebook, and then Business Roundtable, another amalgam of businesses, right? These are just people investing in our politics right now. And out of them, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are in the pharmaceutical business and the medical industries. And 2 of those are industries that are lobby groups that they are also involved in, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Business Roundtable. And I'm starting to wonder, at what point do we start to recognize, Phil, that this system that we have, it's not just, it's hurting my money. It's not just affecting me financially. It's not just whether or not I can afford to put food on the table. This is a direct effect on my health. This system is killing people because there's people out there cutting up their prescribed medication in half to try to get to the next payday, and not everybody's making it.
Yeah, and it's a tough balance, I think, because if companies lose some of the patent rights for brand new branded drugs, do they then spend less money investing in creating new drugs? I don't know exactly, but maybe. But one of the things that can significantly decrease drug prices, and I think this is something that I would support right now unless someone convinced me different, drug companies should not be allowed to have advertisements on TV, radio, magazine, newspaper. We shouldn't be advertising drugs to draw in more customers. That should be up to the responsibility of the doctors. And pharmaceutical sales reps could be able to go out and educate doctors, but they should be salaried positions, and they shouldn't get commissions from convincing doctors to write scripts where you get one doctor that subscribes a certain drug to 20% of their patients, and the next one it's 2%. Are they seeing a materially different group of people, or is one just bought into the commissions and the perks and the bonuses or the vacation that they can get by prescribing drugs?
Yeah. So, yeah. And why is it every time I go to see the doctor and they take my blood pressure, they're writing out what my prescription is with some pen that has like Valtrex,
yeah.
Cialis, or something to help my dick grow bigger. Like, how are these guys able to just flood my professional with their advertisement BS? There's something wrong here, man.
Yeah, and those are the things that I think might be a better fix. From a funny thing is, from a business perspective, I for many years have had the position, and it may shock your ears at first, but let me explain it. I think corporations should pay a tax rate equal to 0.
What?
I know, right? See? And it's a fun thing to say because people are like, wait, I thought I knew a little bit about Phil and where his perspective was. How does that happen? So when corporations pay a tax rate of 0, when they are not paying a taxation, they also get no representation. So they're not allowed to have all these people that they're paying to go talk to government officials. That is illegal. Companies pay no tax, and they don't get any say as corporations in what the U.S. or local governments do. It's the government by the people for the people. Now, those companies, if they pay no taxes, which, by the way, is effectively what most of them pay now anyway, just so you know, but when they officially pay no taxes, they have possibly more money to invest in the future, or they have more money to pay out in either salaries or dividends on the stock, and you can tax that. So the government doesn't necessarily get less taxes, but the company itself doesn't pay any taxes, and it doesn't get any representation. So it's no taxation and no representation, just like the Boston Tea Party was taxation but no representation upsets people. So as long as you're taxing companies, they're going to want representation. So fine, we don't tax you, and you don't get to say a fucking thing. So when we look at how much mercury should be allowed in the air, companies don't get a fucking voice. People do. scientists do. And we decide what is the right amount to be healthy. And then we figure out how to implement that. And if it costs some companies a lot of money to not put out mercury, tough crap for them. Because that's what we as a people have decided is in our best interest medically and environmentally. If we decide that carbon dioxide needs to be cut, the companies don't get a say in that. They just have to do what they're told by regulation. The people should be able to decide what the people want and what's the best interest for all people. And I think that would be a big step towards getting to that point, that the companies don't pay taxes and they don't get a fucking voice. So it's fair because the government is by the people and for the people.
You're responding to the sense of corporate personhood, and I would well, I love that, man. I never even thought of that. That's genius. I would take it a step further and say, let's do fucking both. Let's take their money and take their voice.
Yeah, see, the thing is, as soon as you take one and not the other, they're going to say, hey, we're paying all these taxes. You got to, and that goes to this weird sense of fairness that Americans have. There's a lot of things that you can't just fight the American psyche, like when Beto said, we are coming for your guns.
Yeah,
he's done. Not only is he done, but he permanently harms the image of the Democratic Party as the one that's going to come take your guns. So,
and he increases NRA membership and gun sales tenfold.
Yeah, so that
week,
that kind of thing
makes so much money. And I as a conspiracy leaner, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I look for that. I start to wonder, like, is Beto kind of trying to help out the NRA a little? Because that's pretty fucking stupid to say.
I would guess he was trying to differentiate himself from the field, and it didn't work. But, there's certain things that Americans want, and I think companies could make a nice pitch to say, hey, we're paying all these taxes, but we don't get a voice, and everyone would recognize us that that's wrong. And so I think that'd be harder to sell. And the funny thing is, like, people say companies should pay more taxes. All right, so let's look at a company. Let's say it's paying 0% tax right now. Mm-hmm. If it has to pay 20% tax on its profits, it's got a couple of choices. One, it can just take home less money at the end of the day. And maybe they decide to do that. Two, they could raise prices so that they make the same amount of money, but just pass along the 20% tax to the consumer. And in the end, the consumer pays for everything. So a lot of the taxes, because companies have targets and goals and how much money they want to make, those taxes get passed on as a form of higher cost of goods. So it's not like the consumers aren't paying it. It's not like the corporations exist in this nebulous bubble that, oh, shit, we charge them a higher tax. Wah, wah, they're out all that money. They might be. They might choose just to eat it. But I think most of them are going to say, we have to build that into our model and increase the price of Keebler crackers so that we can pay that tax. If they can get away with it, if the market demand is such that they can't raise the prices, then maybe they don't. But if corporations pay no taxes, then you have no reason for them to go to all these places around the world where they are paying no taxes anyway, and it's not benefiting Americans at all. So they can repatriate all of that money for a penalty, for some kind of one-time discounted tax. And once they've done that, they get to join the 0% tax with everybody. The other thing that I have that's unusual is that companies should not be in charge of my health care at all.
Absolutely.
And there should be, I don't know what the right word is, universal health care, single payer, global Medicare for all. Come on.
Whatever you call it.
Because
why is my job telling me how my health is going to work out?
Right.
Sick of it. And these same companies that we're working for are the same companies that are lobbying our government. 1976, Buckley v. Vallejo struck down limits on independent expenditures. Citizens United, your guests, I'm sure, are very familiar with that one, versus FEC 2010, eliminated limits on corporate expenditures for or against an opponent as long as not coordinated. SpeechNow.org v. FEC 2010, individual donations to independent groups that advocate to influence elections cannot be limited to $5,000. So they can not only do they equate their money to voice, which means that limits my voice because I don't have their money, but they get to spend whatever they want. And the regulations that we had in place before, they've ripped that away. We're standing out there naked in the street and nobody's listening to us, man.
Yeah, that clearly needs to be fixed. And of course, since we're on that, the entire black hole of churches not having to report anything, I could concede to the point that they don't pay taxes, but they've got to follow the rules that every other 501c3 follows, and they have to publish reports showing how much they brought in, where they brought it in from, and where it went. And a lot of people don't know that most churches, the amount of money they get donated versus the amount of money that they spit out is an incredibly small fraction. I've done a thing on a show sometimes. I don't know if you've caught one of the episodes where I do church money, where people actually find the budget from a church, whether they went to vote there or went to a wedding there or a funeral there, or just, went with a relative to a church, and out on a front table, they've got a budget laying there and they pick that up and they send it to me. Most churches, it's a couple of percent, if it's not zero, that actually goes to helping people in need. And most of it is just to keep the church going. And that's fine, but it's got to be known. It's got to be public. But there's so many things. We just solved like half the world's problems right here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Burwell versus Hobby Lobby stores just happened. Literally happened 5 years ago.
Yeah. Is that the one with the birth control thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was too much effort.
The literal first time in American history. Everybody's like, oh, this country was founded by Christians or whatever. No, the first time ever that you were able to, as a corporation, use your religious belief to violate the law.
Yep.
And they backed it. Things are going sideways, Phil. And that's why I ask you, like, when's the next recession? When's the next... what's coming around? And I'm not asking for your crystal ball, man.
It's a funny thing. I have said before, and I'll stand by it, that people losing their rights is not necessarily bad for an economy. So, I mean, I'd like to think that it's wrong, and we'll see through that and we'll fix it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the economy or the stock market suffer. It means people suffer. So that's a problem on its own merits, and I don't think that whether the economy does well or poorly is the indicator. It's whether people do well or poorly, and we need to find a way to have some fucking compassion and allow more people to do better. That's the driving factor for me is when I decide or think about what is right and what is wrong. How can we help a lot of people and not just a few?
Yeah.
Well, I hate to do it because we're having so much fun, but I don't want to spend all day doing this, and I don't want to bore my listeners.
I'm going to get blood pressure problems.
There you go. Tell us again how we can reach you and the podcast.
TheRightToReason.com, Patreon.com/right. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on all of your podcast outlets. Phil, thank you so much, man.
Oh, it was a great pleasure.
I'm sorry that I got angry.
It's all good. We fixed it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Robert, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you helping out the Phil Ferguson Show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I love talking to you, man.
You're listening to the Phil Ferguson Show.
So in the past months, from time to time, I've skipped a show where it's taken me 10 days or 12 days to get out my next weekly episode. And I don't really claim that I'm going to do it weekly. But now I'm putting out a show in less than a week. And it's a weird thing because running up to Christmas, I didn't know who I was going to talk to. I was falling behind, and it's a holiday season and things get busy. And of course, running up to the 12/31 deadline, a lot of clients don't answer my calls or my emails, but the ones that do, or people that call me up, have something that's pressing and urgent and they want to resolve it right away. So it creates this weird feeling where I have sometimes not enough to do, but I can't go anywhere because I'm tied to the desk because I have to be able to satisfy people and their needs. And I was hoping to take some of that weird downtime and get some new software for the business, new thing to me, called a CRM, Client Resource Management, where I could put everything in one big place. Unfortunately, they took an extra 2 to 3 weeks to upload my initial batch of data. So I'm a couple weeks behind on that project. It looks like it's going well. And I think once I get over this hump of a couple of months of spending time getting that up to speed, I should be more efficient with my business, perform a little bit better, and maybe it allows room for me to take on a few clients. I'm still in the holding pattern till the middle of February. I'm not taking any new clients. You can still email me and we can have a call and talk about things, but I'm trying to get all this data from 4 or 5 or 6 different places where it just kind of organically built over the last 2 decades to be mostly in one place so I can manage it better. And once I get to that point, I think I'll be able to take on a few more clients, but we'll see. I'll let you know when we get to that point in middle February, and I'll let you know what I decide. But if you have questions, you can still email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. A couple things coming up. I know that in March, I think it's March 1st, I'll have to double check in the next episode or two, I will be going to Austin, Texas. I will be on the Atheist Experience for my annual visit. Maybe I'll be on some of the other shows. We still have to work out those details, but we'll see what happens. And I think my wife and I are going to make a road trip out of it and go visit some places between Chicago and Austin or around Texas area. So if you have any brilliant ideas of things to see, from flower gardens to museums around Austin, Dallas, Waco, Houston, I don't think I'm going to drive the extra few miles to El Paso, mind you. But, if you know of something that you think might interest me and or my wife, please feel free to let me know. If you have questions about your portfolio, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. I also have every expectation to be at the American Atheist Conference. I think this year it's in Phoenix. I'm going to have to get someone on to talk about that show. So a little break here in the craziness and things are coming up. But the reason the show is coming out so quickly compared to the last show, and I got distracted myself a few minutes ago, I sent out a whole bunch of emails and messages to people saying, hey, can you come on my show? Can you come on my show? Can you come on my show? And sometimes what happens is you ask 4 or 5 people and one of them responds and yay, you have an interview for your show. But sometimes you send out 4 or 5 interviews and 4 or 5 people respond, yeah, I'd love to. And that's what happened. So I have extra interviews and I don't want to make the people that were kind enough to spend time with me wait too long to have their interview be in a show. And also, there's a lot of stuff going on at the very beginning of the year, like the information on what happened in 2019. And I, at some point, have to build my model to see how we have done over the last 13 or 14 years using different investment philosophies. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm trying to get these shows out. And I hope you appreciate it. I hope you enjoy it. Over at patreon.com/Phil, you can become a patron. I did notice that I have a new patron that apparently is committed to a very large dollar amount per episode. Thank you. Thank you very much. I do hope that was your intention and not a typo. If it was a typo, please let me know immediately, and you and or I can get with Patreon and get that fixed. I hope that was your intent. And if you are that person and need help, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Other people that keep joining at Patreon and contributing $1 or more, thank you very much. It's nice to know that people appreciate the work I do to put into this show. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can go to iTunes or Stitcher and leave a 5-star review for the show. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. I do hope to see you out there on the road somewhere soon, either in Texas for my visit to the Atheist Experience, I think, again, March 1st, or for the Easter weekend American Atheist Conference. And as more things get firmed up here going forward this year, I'll let you know. Until then, ciao.